probably your third time now. We've chatted about AppSec and NVD and a whole bunch of other stuff. But this time I'm bringing you on to chat about your latest report, your vendor breakdown, and your AI security report. What did you title it actually? AI security market report. And I've shared a lot of your content, over the past year or so. I find myself sharing quite a bit, blogs and write-ups and things you do. Obviously having you on the show, but this one in particular, I was reading. I'm like, this is amazing. The way you kind of frame the market, the way you talk about the vendors, the different use cases, what's old is new again in some ways, that kind of thing. But before we dive into the report, can you tell us a bit about the background of the report, like what led you to making it, what was the process, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, in general, with Latio, I'm trying to move towards doing more big market reports like this as one part. And what spurred this one, like timing wise, was simply at RSA, I did a talk with Checkpoint and Wiz going through like the state of the AI market. And I had already done a lot of work just in preparation for that talk. And so I wanted to expand it and turn it into a report. I think it's really timely because so many, like everyone's marketing strategy right now is saying, no longer are we acronym. We are now AI acronym, and we are the leader in AI acronym. And whenever there's this vague thing like that out there, that's a signal to me to hop in and actually like figure out what's going on and try to communicate that back to people. So yeah, that was really the
Yeah, no,
impetus.
that makes sense. As I read it, and I'm trying to keep up with all this stuff. I'm sharing stuff weekly. I'm trying to watch different vendors and the use cases and how they're applying this technology to security, as well as using, or as well as like securing the technology itself, right? Securing the AI as well as using AI for security and trying to make sense of it all. And now there's new acronyms coming out. Speaking of which, we love our acronyms. There's got to be an acronym. We're going to walk through all these areas of the report, but you start off talking about this new acronym AI TRISM. It's AI trust, risk, and security management. This new category. First off, where the hell did that come from? What exactly does it mean? What kind of tools and products and solutions fall into that category?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's fun to beat up on Gartner for making these like goofy categories, but there is a real reason they do it. Because of most of who they work with are big enterprises, the challenge that they were trying to tackle is, I'm an enterprise CISO. My CTO wants us to adopt all of these AI technologies. How can I safely do that? And typically Gartner ends up creating vendor, like the answer to every problem has to be some vendor with a category attached to it. But really the for a lot of enterprises, this first question was just a governance question and a policy question. And so we saw a lot of tools and vendors out there that I just don't even tackle in the report because from an engineering perspective, it's so boring to me. But it's like, here's all these policies, and we've built the best policies you've ever seen on how to adopt AI stuff, but we're not actually doing anything besides that. But then you have like Gartner's got to combine all of this because you've got startups focused on policies, you've got startups focused on like monitoring end user behavior, like if an employee is going to ChatGPT. And then you've got the products that I'm the most personally excited about, which is like the runtime application security stuff. And you've got to somehow lump all of these products together into like, we're helping enterprises adopt AI. And so that's how you end up with this goofy, like, we're increasing AI trust and helping you do governance and risk combined with like general security management. And it's all just around this like vague, I feel like with security, there's this interesting trend of when a new technology comes out, you'll see a spurt of vendors around that technology. So we saw like Kubernetes security, cloud security is sort of an example of that, like early cloud security. And then you have AI security, but then you even had a blip of like every hype technology this happens, like Web3 security, when we thought Web3 was going to be the hot thing, crypto security stuff. Like, and so really this spurt of vendors all just conglomerated into this AI TRISM category, even though they're all pretty fundamentally different tools.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's fun to make fun of the acronyms, and like there's always a new acronym. I feel like it's driven by buyers and analysts and such. Like Gartner, you talked about them, like trying to make sense of the market, but also you'll see it being driven by vendors sometimes who like champion the creation of a new category so that they can position themselves, of course, as leader of said category. That happens as well. But you do need to make sense of the different solutions, the product, the vendors, where they fit in, what they do exactly, because it is a lot to try to make sense of. And I think we're going to see, the categories play out as they always do, which is new innovative startups come out and try to tackle the category and the gaps. incumbent large players, try to organically either develop a solution, or as we saw recently with I think it was Protect AI, I want to say, and Palo Alto, come out and actually acquire, one of the up and coming innovative, solutions, for example, in the market. And it's going to run that typical life cycle that we always see play out here, and then we'll get back to the age old build versus not build versus buy, but point solutions versus platforms debate and all that fun stuff. I won't take us down that rabbit hole, but I agree. I think it's useful to make sense of it. So in the report, you talk about these AI security use cases. This is another thing I thought was helpful, is because AI seems to be everything. Like it's kind of woven into everything we do now. It's in every vendor's claiming to use it. We want to use it for different purposes on our end, for whether it's developing code or creating policies for the organization, or generating content. All these kind of things that we're using it for. And you talk about these different AI security use cases. You lay out the four that you lay out are end user data control, AI posture management, application runtime, and AI for security. And obviously some of these, have been around, like DLP, it's not new. SaaS, security posture management, those kind of things are not new. Runtime is obviously, on the uptick in your opinion, I think, and you're right. But talk about these, different use cases for us a bit here.
Yeah, I mean, the first three are really the core of the report, as far as diving into what are the security risks that are out there, and then how are the different vendors helping. And something I really wanted to get across clearly in the report is that there's nothing new with AI security from a technical standpoint. We're talking about, on the end user data control side, we're talking about browser plugins, we're talking about secure browsers, we're talking about DLP and permissions management for like Microsoft Copilot and Gemini. These are not new technologies, but they're new areas of focus. And so the vendors who are really focusing here have legitimate features that help them do AI security better than older DLP, zero trust provider. But it's not like the other guys are just not doing anything. And so they're all focused on creating those features as well. And then on the posture management side, I think, I made fun of Wiz when they did AI SPM because I thought it was goofy. But once again, they were just ahead on timing and branding things. But all that is just helping teams as they learn about how AI is getting used in their environment, getting some of that basic visibility. And that's where most teams are right now, is trying to just get a wrangle on, are we using Hugging Face? Are we using Crew AI? Like, how are we building our agents? Are we using Anthropic? What's the authorization? Like all of that posture side. And then application runtime is sort of a fascinating piece, because it's led to like this weird reemergence of Raspberry style technologies. Like, most people in this category have some sort of SDK or API that you can put into your application to do runtime protection. And really that has all of the same pro-con trade-offs as traditional Raspberry. And so that's a really interesting emergence of a category of tooling. And really the thing was frustrating about the report is there's a sense in which I'm reporting on what the market is doing, and then there's a sense in saying what I think it should do. And I think that creates a lot of confusion when people only look at the pictures, which is, the mass amount of people, like so many people complaining about various aspects of like the vendor diagram, when really the issue is a lot of people, because their goal is enterprise AI adoption, build solutions for all three of these things in the same place, but they're not really doing all three of them. Like they're really focusing on one of the three at a time, because what I try to communicate in the report is it doesn't really make sense to have one vendor do all of this stuff. Why you would never have like your secure browser plugin be the same people that are making your runtime application protection. But for AI, all of a sudden it's like, we have to make this make sense somehow, because some enterprises want one part, some enterprises want the other. And as a vendor, we want to do both. And so what I would prefer is for people to just totally separate those use cases. And that's the reality of the situation. But I have to report on, if a vendor does technically support both use cases, then it's a unified solution. And then finally, just to touch on the fourth point, I wanted to include it in the report just because there's a lot of confusion about when you say you're a security company for AI, do you mean for securing AI, or do you mean you're using AI in an innovative way? And so I just wanted to call it out more representative than exhaustive, because if I was to make an exhaustive list of AI security innovation, literally every security vendor would be involved because they all have an AI story at the moment. But just trying to use some illustrations to say, hey, this same divide between startups and incumbents is happening within security products, where you have new security products that are built from the ground up with an AI native approach, where they're thinking, all right, what if we took vulnerability management and we solve that end to end only with AI agents? And then you have people who are incumbents in the category who are using AI in innovative ways. And that's going to create different sorts of product experiences. And so that's really what that category was meant to highlight.
Yeah, that category in particular for me is one that I find exciting or interesting because we do have so many challenges in cybersecurity, whether it's the alert fatigue and burnout among the SOC, it's struggling to keep up in the application security context, being outnumbered by developers, vulnerability backlogs running away, like legacy GRC practices which are manual and cumbersome. So like using AI for security is something I think is exciting to see like where we can go with it and what we can do. And it is an interesting dichotomy. On one hand, you have, like you said, the AI native companies who are kind of building from scratch. They have the benefit of not having legacy tech debt and needing to kind of factor their entire platform and solution. But on the other hand, the incumbents also have a massive amount of data, for example, of things that they've already been doing for a long time that they can use, or they have a large customer base or established relationships. So it's a dichotomy in that sense of a double-edged sword. Each have some pros and cons to them. As in the next section of the report, you talk about the different risk types that you tie to each category. Let's talk about those a bit, because you tie certain risks to kind of the use case that you just talked about there.
Yeah, for end user, I mean, and this is essential to me because I think this is the part that security engineers care the most about, is trying to even figure out what are the risks of using it in the first place. And honestly, AI security is really challenging because the risk really quickly goes from almost non-existent to extremely high. And it's really hard to tell when that switch happens. And for most people, there's very little risk. Like if employees are just chatting with ChatGPT, like even if they are uploading sensitive data, like I don't know, we don't monitor unless you're in an extremely high regulatory environment where DLP is essential and you're like doing the whole military lockbox phone thing. Like, are we really gonna obsess over DLP to this crazy extent that we're doing? Like ChatGPT has a checkbox for the corporate plans to not train on data. And like, are you going to buy a whole tool that just says you have that checkbox checked? Probably not. But there are a few emerging pieces in the end user side. First is like the cursor, the MCP configuration stuff is legitimately pretty high risk at the moment because you're basically putting plain text API keys in most cases into a JSON file on the local developer workstation. Most developer workstations are pretty excluded from device management controls because they need to do a lot of funky looking stuff. And so there is a lot of risk around the key leakage, the data that you're giving access to. Trying to trace, even get visibility into that is pretty hard. But on the employee side, I just think the risk level is pretty low. The bias in hiring is an interesting thing because of regulatory requirements, where if you're using AI to do candidate assessment recruiting, there's a legitimate like regulatory risk there. But you can stretch some issues where what if someone gets a new style phishing email that has prompt injection hidden in it and they're using like an AI automation to read the email and do stuff. Like, okay, it's just we're getting into sort of niche security places. But a lot of enterprises care about this because they just want visibility into it. But I've always thought that this risk category is pretty short term because it's driven by lack of trust for OpenAI and Anthropic mostly. But once we trust those providers more, I think people will stop caring so much about what data is going into them. On the posture side, it's really about it's the classic secure configuration thing. And this is interesting too, because as more and more companies, it seems to be consolidating around using third-party APIs instead of hosting your own models for the most part. And so the posture side is really just, are you using ChatGPT or are you using a different model than that? And so it's a questionable value. I mean, it is helpful in showing you like, hey, you're using Hugging Face, or you're doing these training models, or you're doing a lot of Jupyter notebooks with custom data flows to train your own models. Like that's where the posture stuff comes in. But if you're not doing a lot of like custom data engineering, then the risk is also sort of low, in my opinion. And the runtime application side is where, on the one hand, if you just have a chatbot app, there's like zero risk because it's just a user session. Like, are they going to prompt inject themselves to like scam themselves? There's not, the risk isn't really there. But if you start wiring up that service to internal data and you start allowing agents to take actions on behalf of the user, all of a sudden the risk like skyrockets to where you just have this undeterministic thing looking up data on behalf of users, and the permissioning suddenly matters a lot. The prompt injection protection suddenly matters a lot. And so it's this weird tipping point where either it's like zero risk or it's super high risk. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought some of these were interesting. As you said, some of these are, things that have been around for a while, or they're fairly simplistic depending on the implementation or what you're using, the technology for. But the cursor MCP piece is interesting as we see like the MCP, tool, misconfigurations and some of the things that are happening there. I think it was also some of the vendors now, like everyone, as you know, is like announcing, we have an MCP offering, right? Or, but also I think it was Asana. I may have it wrong, but Asana, I think it was, right, who had a pretty big MCP incident. It looks like the past week where they had some multi-tenancy issues and data exposure to some extent. And it's also interesting, the posture side of it, as you said, like on one hand, it seems kind of generic and boring, but on the other, like anyone who's done cloud for a long time knows, yeah, there's a lot of benefit of like leaning to the cloud provider, but you may not be using secure, default configurations. How long did it take AWS, for example, to make buckets private by default? It was like a decade. So there may be some silly things that you could, mitigate if you just had good posture of the service offerings that you're using, for example. And again, the runtime piece, definitely makes sense, and that's on the uptick in a lot of different ways in application security. You've talked about that quite a bit. So you go on from here and you break down each of these. I definitely, again, folks got to dig into the report to get to the nitty gritty of all of it, but a lot of great details in here and information on each of the attack types, the use cases that we talked about there. From there, you go on to talk about AI adoption and security needs. And I was curious, what were some of the findings, some of the key findings that were either, intuitive, like, yeah, this makes sense, or some things that you were a little bit surprised about as well?
Yeah, I love this part mostly because most people seem to agree with my intuition on it, which was great. It's always nice when the research just backs you up. Hopefully that's not just audience bias on who was surveyed, but yeah, in general, when it comes to people who care about the workforce security side of things, I expected this split to happen because either you're the kind of company that cares about DLP in general, and then you're going to care about AI DLP, or you're the kind of company that doesn't care about DLP, and you're not going to care about AI DLP either. And that was pretty reflective. And then the thing with the application security side of things, and in general, is there's a lot of like pent up demand. But if you scroll down, the part of the survey that I thought was the most interesting were these two: is securing AI infrastructure a 2025 concern? 75% or over 75% of people said that it is a concern this year. But then when it comes to, is it the highest concern? Almost no one said yes. And so people are just early in like getting concerned about it. And then when you ask them, are you looking to partner with a vendor to do some of this? The answers, almost no one said directly yes. It was all maybes or no's. And it gets to just where we're at with AI adoption. Like, people understand that there's security risks here. People are generally nervous about AI security risks, but they don't have a clear enough idea of what those are or what a vendor solution would even look like. And that's why there's so many different vendor solutions. Like, there's some that do in-flight data aliasing. There's some that do like advanced analysis on the prompts itself that are coming to the system, on mapping out the tool calling and protecting those and the permissioning. People just don't even know what a vendor solution would look like that they would find helpful because they're still learning what the kind of attacks are. And that's why I think Palo actually generally makes pretty good acquisitions. And that's where Protect AI was primarily on like the model security scanning side of things, because that's where people are. It's like, that's why the AI red teaming is so popular right now more than the AI runtime protection piece, because people want to like test their configuration of models and get an idea of what an attack even looks like, so that then they can think about, okay, how do we build guardrails around it? But we're really still in this discovery phase where people know it's going to be a concern, and there's all this money and hype around how do we secure it. But there's no immediate, like, I need this solution. just because people don't have a category for what that solution looks like.
Yeah, I think that raises a couple interesting points that I'll throw out there. It's like, again, in the beginning, you talked about the need for the report, driven by just the confusion in the market of the different vendors and the solutions and like how they can be applied and what even the potential attacks are, the risks are. So that kind of, I think the second part of your survey here is speaking to that, where people are just navigating, like, how are we even using this and what should we be concerned about and what are the potential attack types and what risks, need to be top of mind. And then from the vendor's perspective, it's probably reassuring to some, vendors who are really, and investors who are focusing on this space to hear, everyone realizes it's a concern, but they haven't necessarily committed any funds yet, which makes, it's disappointing, right, in some regard, but it's also exciting because it means there's a large untapped potential for, vendors to go out there and start to, sell these solutions now that organizations get a bit more mature in terms of what they need to be thinking about. How should they be securing it? What kind of solutions can help? Those kind of things. So there's a lot of potential there too, I think. You also talk about in the report, old solutions, new problems. And we talked about this in the beginning a little bit, but what did you, kind of what were you shooting for in this section? I think this is helpful because honestly, as a practitioner, and I know you can relate to this, even though we're, I guess, you and I and others like us are like always reading and learning and trying to make sure we're keeping up. But like some people are just busy as hell and don't have time and like they feel overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. And it's like, I just can't keep up. And like, but then you kind of get some assurance of like, actually, a lot of this may seem new and novel, but it actually is not. And there's a lot of long-standing security practices and fundamental methodologies that are, hugely applicable still.
Yeah, there is no pressing mad rush to go buy an AI security solution at the moment, which I know saying that goes against a lot of the like financial interests I would have in go buy fear uncertainty. But like there's really because each of these maps so clearly to existing categories of solutions. For most people, you're pretty well covered based on your existing strategy. And that's really what this is trying to get across is like, if you own a solution in any of these existing categories, they probably have some early version of a feature that deals with some AI security, and you can sort of mature your program with your existing vendor. But then this gets to the flowchart approach at the end of the report is, there are situations in which, okay, we are adopting AI more heavily and aggressively than your average company is. And that's when you might want to look at a dedicated solution for it. Like if you're if you're even on the DLP side, because in general, I think that's very low risk. But if you're pushing your employees to build a lot of custom intranet Copilot apps, and your permissioning is sort of a mess, your existing DLP solution probably doesn't help a lot with that. And that's the kind of pressing need that would drive adoption of like an AI tool for that category. And so it's really just case by case, trying to let people know existing solutions map to a lot of these categories, but there are situations in which you would go and buy like a dedicated AI vendor to help with some specific problem.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think, again, like these things here, like if you're not doing these fundamental foundational type things, you likely wouldn't benefit as much from an AI nuanced, specific solution because you're not even doing the fundamentals right. Like you don't even know what's on the network or where traffic's going or where data's going. Or,
well, that's it's honestly, it's a frustrating time, I think, to be a vendor and an analyst right now because all of the marketing attention is on just AI in this like vague sense that it's totally like everyone's roadmap was built around how do we reduce false positives? How do we get better reachability analysis? How do we get to better true positives? But now we're like building MCP servers and we don't know why. And it's like just these random assortments of AI features that are like maybe an okay demo, but just don't actually connect to any useful security outcomes. Because it's such a weird thing where like everybody recognizes and agrees that AI is the future, but they don't know how that connects to the user experience yet. And so we're building AI out of a fear of getting left behind rather than out of a clear like, oh, we need AI because here's a user outcome we want to deliver.
Yeah, I was reading something recently. I forget the source of it, but it was like talking about how organizations and leaders are being pressured by the board to be
Yes.
adopting AI faster. And it's like, how about we focus on like what outcome are we after, and how could technology kind of accelerate or benefit that outcome versus we just must use the technology because we have to use it.
Well, this is the frustration with doing reports like this is, in a way, I contribute to that because people only see this picture of like, here's the vendors and what they're doing. And they're like, oh, how do we get on that picture? Oh, I want to be on the picture. But if they actually read the report, it's saying like, hey, you probably don't need to buy any of these. and the hype is dialed down quite a bit.
Yeah, you have this good Venn diagram kind of showing the overlap among existing solutions and some of the things that you should be keeping an eye on here. And then you took us to the probably the most contentious part of the
Yeah, this is the
report, which
spicy
is
bit.
your market map. And I do a lot of writing and speaking and stuff, but I've never ventured into this space where you and you and Francis and others kind of do these market maps, because I feel like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like you mention someone's gonna be mad. If you don't mention someone's gonna be mad. And it's like, they're
Well,
not
it's
happy with where they were in the category or where they are in the, so what was your kind of, thought process into the market map? And also what was the experience once you put it out there?
yeah, I just did whoever paid me the most money got the best picture part. I'm just kidding, obviously. It's the what's there's a couple things. I've learned that it's pay to play if your vendor wasn't on there. Like that's what makes it pay to play or not. Um, and then like I have a website where you can see all of the vendors I'm aware of, and all of the vendors I'm aware of were included on this. Plus some that I tried to get in touch with Lakera a million times and like didn't get a response, and they're still on here because like I'm aware of them and what they're doing. So there's no like secret conspiracy to exclude people or not. This is just it's a reward for people who bother to reach out, talk about what they're doing, or they have a big enough brand that like Lakera is impossible to ignore in the space because of the success of the Gandalf challenge and talking to the different practitioners who actually use them. Like there's a tipping point where it has to be included. And then the same with the biggest missing one here is Palo, and it's because of how new the acquisition was. Like the way that I'm different, I think, than a lot of analyst firms is I'm not just like taking a pitch deck and then going, oh, so then they're unified now. Like I need to see the product. And there's probably like the extent to which that product exists, given how new the Protect AI acquisition is. Like I'm not just looking at these things as like feature checkboxes where, oh, technically now they have all the feature checkboxes, therefore they're in the logo picture. Like I'm trying to get a sense of the product and how it works. The thing with this particular diagram that was really frustrating is that, and I call this out excessively in the report itself, but obviously people just look at the picture, is like everyone in the unified tool category isn't really a unified tool. Like they are built much more for one use case over the other. And like by technicality, they do both. So companies like Noma and Pillar, for example, are much more heavy on the application protection posture, exploring your code base, exploring your infrastructure setup. And then they also do some like DLP browser stuff. Conversely, like Witness and Zenity are much more focused on the permissioning end user protection side, but then like by extension do some AI runtime side. And that's why the vendors I appreciate the most are the ones who were okay being in a box that was specific and not the unified part, because it shows that like they are confidently focused on one thing over another. But yeah, that's that. All that to say, yes, a lot of people were upset, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think it just comes with the nature of making these market maps. You're never going to make everyone happy, and everyone's going to have a difference of opinion or like some input to provide. And I still find it helpful. And a couple of things you said I want to call out there too is your comment on Palo, for example. Like you come from the reason I value your input and your analysis is you come from a practitioner background. You want to see how things are working, not just what the claims are. Like you want to go validate said claims and actually see how things work, which is helpful and is more ethical in my opinion. And two is your comment on the unified tool, it speaks to the fact that every company has a core competency that they start around. Like they want to be great at X. It doesn't mean that they don't extend into more features and functionality and try to become a more comprehensive platform, but they set out with some initial goal or some initial target. Like Gnostic is a company that jumps out, like, to me, it's like, and I know many of these companies, but like, they just have a very thing that something that they're very focused on, very passionate about, and try to be very good at. And that's good. Like, some of these problems are massive problems, and having a vendor that's great at, said problem is a really valuable thing to have. And it doesn't mean over time they won't grow and expand their, offering and so on, but that's where they focus for now, and they want to become good at it. So I appreciate that context too. Just in the sake of time, I wanted to, move us along to the one other section of the report I was going to dive into with you today. Again, folks, definitely check it out. The report is great. It breaks down all the vendors, what they do, their features, their functionality, comparable vendors. It's a really awesome report here to dig into. And, he dives in more to AI leaders and innovators. Again,
yeah,
check that
this was
out.
Also whoever I just charged the most. We had a bidding war for
who wants to be on the leaderboard. Yeah.
It was an open eBay auction.
So last but not least, you have this tool buying flowchart, which I thought was cool because, again, it speaks to the earlier part of the conversation where, organizations and security teams, like, they're busy doing day-to-day stuff. Like, they don't have time to dig in deep to this. They're trying to figure out what vendor does what, what do I need to be concerned about in terms of risk or attack types and so on. Tell us a bit about your tool buying flowchart, and we can kind of step through it a little as well.
Yeah. If you want to go down to it, it's at the end of the day, most practitioners have a problem, and then they narrow their vendor selection down to like 2 or 3 that they're going to go and do POCs with. So the goal of these flowcharts is, I asked myself, what could I do instead of a magic quadrant that would actually be helpful? Because as a practitioner, why would I buy a tool based on like the company's ability to execute and like the vision? Like, I don't care. Like, what does the product do? And so something that's actually helpful for people, instead of a diagram where like CrowdStrike and Palo are in the top right and everyone else is like somewhere else sprinkled in, so they can all be called a leader or whatever. Like here, even because I included some unified people in the specific boxes. Like, that's why like Zenity and AIM and Lasso, for example, are in the end user data control, while Pillar and Gnome are in the application protection box in this diagram, because it's highlighting like where they're actually strongest as well. And so if you're building first party AI applications, then you need to ask yourself, are we like on the front lines and urgently need like a runtime solution that does that? Well, then here are the main players in the runtime application space that you can go and look at their website and try to narrow down your decision. But if you want holistic application protection, and the AI part is sort of like not the most immediately pressing part, like that's the ADR piece. And then if you so then we move on to the end user protection use case, which is if your employees are regularly handling like highly regulated data, you have a lot of like a law firm building Microsoft Copilot stuff that has to really be concerned about like who has access to what data, then you might want to look at a dedicated solution for managing the AI permissioning of your applications. But if you don't have some insanely granular AI risky use case, then you're probably fine to wait for your existing zero trust DLP vendor to continue rolling out solutions that help do some of that. And then finally, the custom ML models piece, we talked a little bit about this with the posture side, so I won't get into that. And then the final bucket is if you have all of these use cases, then it's when you probably want to look at someone who actually does all of them. And something I call it in the text of the report is the classic platform point solution trade-off, where you have to recognize if you're buying into this, if you're going to try to get someone that does all of it, you're giving up pieces of maturity on one side or the other. And so for me right now, if I was a buyer on these solutions, the use cases are so separate that I just wouldn't care at all about the unified whatever. I would just ask myself, do I primarily have the DLP problem on the end user side, or do I primarily have the application problem? And then I would select a vendor based on that. But then I recognize for enterprise CISOs who are looking more for like a high level partnership that's even slightly less focused on the product as it exists in its current state, that's probably when they're more looking for like the all-in-one providers to sort of help their company figure out an AI adoption strategy in the first place. But that's not like I really write heavily for my own background, which is like highly technical, like SaaS cloud providers, where uh, their employee base is technical enough that they're probably not like looking for this vague like how do we adopt AI. They're more asking specific problems with it.
Yeah, they have a specific pain point or use case or something they want to tackle. And to your earlier comments too, or something I might have said actually is these nuanced providers that are focused on a core competency and problem. It's likely that over time they're also going to add more features, functionality, and kind of expand their portfolio of an offering too. So it really depends if you're looking for depth versus breadth in terms of offerings and capabilities. So James, we've kind of run the gamut in terms of AI attack types. Use cases for the security tools, what the leading vendors are, and who may be upset about that. The decision flow chart as well. Again, I'm a big fan of your work. I've shared, many of your reports and write-ups and articles and stuff over the past year or so. But I strongly recommend folks go check it out at Latio.tech. I'm sorry, on the website there. You can grab a copy of the report. You can check out, James's writing on different topics from CNAPP to cloud security to AppSec to AI, you name it. So James, I appreciate you coming on, man. And what should folks keep an eye out? What are you working on next?
The next report will be on cloud security. And the biggest, most pressing thing is Latio.tech is about to get a big Latio.com revamp thing. So that
Awesome.
is the thing that is most pressing. Me and Claude Code hammering away. So
awesome. All right. Love to hear it, man. I'll be on the lookout for the next report and also the website revamp, and appreciate you coming on.
thanks, man. Thanks for